Now, let's take a look at division. Specifically, we're going to just jump in and look at an example. Let's look at 548 divided by 4. Now, division problems are set up quite differently from addition, subtraction, and multiplication problems. We have a division symbol that looks like this, and the first number of the division goes on the inside, 548 in this case. The other number, the second number, goes on the outside, in this case 4. And it is a multi-step process. So we're going to go through this one at a time, and we will get to do the steps over and over so that you get a chance to get used to them. So first, we look at this first digit, 5, and we ask ourselves, how many times can 4 go into 5? And the answer is 1. 4 goes into 5 just one time. Once we figured out how many times 4 goes into 5, and we have our answer up here, we multiply that number by 4 and put the answer down below the 5. So 1 times 4 is 4, and then we subtract. 5 minus 4 gives us 1. 1 is actually the remainder when we take 5 and divide it by 4. It goes in one time with a remainder of 1. Then we move over and we look at the next digit, 4, and we bring it down along with the remainder from the previous step, and now we have 14. And we ask ourselves, how many times does 4 go into 14? Well, 4 goes into 14 3 times, because 4 times 3 is 12. And when we subtract, that gives us a remainder of 2. So each step has multiple parts. We're looking to see how many times 4 goes into something, whether it's 5 or 14. When we know how many times it goes in, we've got to multiply, and then we subtract to get the remainder. So 1 times 4 was 4, we subtracted to get 1. Then we bring down the 14. 4 goes into 14 3 times. 3 times 4 is 12, subtract to get the remainder of 2. And then we bring down the next digit, which is 8, and we do the same thing. How many times does 4 go into 28? It goes in 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. And we've got no remainder down here, which is how it's going to work for the problems that we're looking at now. We will look at problems with decimals later this week where we will have to kind of keep going. But these are all built to divide evenly. So in this case, 548 divided by 4 gives us 137, and that's our answer. This is how the division algorithm works. This is how we do division. Now the next example we're going to look at is 48 divided by 3. We're going to set it up in a similar way. 48 goes on the inside of the division symbol, and then 3 goes on the left-hand side. And then we ask ourselves, how many times does 3 go into 4? It goes in once. 1 times 3 is 3, and when we subtract, we get a remainder of 1. Then we bring down the 8. How many times does 3 go into 18? It goes in 6 times. 6 times 3 gives us 18, and with no remainder, that tells us our final answer is 16. Now, next, I want to look at 48 divided by -3. Let's look at what happens when we have some negative numbers. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at a connection between multiplication and division to figure out how to proceed here. Earlier, we saw 48 divided by 3 equals 16. We could rewrite that as a multiplication by saying 3 times 16 equals 48. Every division problem can be rearranged into a multiplication problem. And so if we're looking at 48 divided by -3, we can rearrange that, and so it's going to be -3 times something equals 48. Now, if we're going to do a multiplication and end up with a positive, and the first number is negative, the second number also has to be a negative, because a negative times a negative gives us a positive. So this is going to be -16. And what that tells us is that in the division problem, we end up with negative 16 there. So in this case, a positive divided by a negative is a negative. We could continue here if we wanted to. We could take negative 48 divided by 3 and try to figure that out. The corresponding multiplication would be 3 times what gives us negative 48. And if we want to multiply a positive number by something to get a negative number, we're going to need this to be negative. So this is going to be negative 16, which means that our answer here is negative 16. And then the last one we're going to look at is negative 48 divided by negative 3. I think some of you can probably guess at this point the answer is going to be positive. The negatives cancel out, and it's similarly to what's going on with multiplication. The equivalent multiplication would be negative 3 times 16 equals negative 48. And if we look at these 4 examples of division, we can see that the rules for dividing with negatives are the same as the rules with multiplying with negatives. When they have the same sign, the answer is positive. And when they have different signs, the answer is negative. So the rules here are the same as the rules with multiplication. They're the same as the rules with multiplication. So now we know how to perform division, and we know how to deal with positives and negatives. So we're almost there, but there's one more thing we have to talk about. We have to talk about what happens when we're dividing and we have 0. So I want to look at a couple of problems. I want to look at 0 divided by 5, and I want to look at 5 divided by 0. Now, 0 divided by 5, if we want to think about this as a real problem, let's say I have $0 in my bank account, and I decide to split all of that money evenly amongst my 5 friends. How much does each person get? They get $0. So 0 divided by 5 is 0. It would be the same if we took 0 and divided it by 7, or 0 divided by 10. And this makes sense if we look at the corresponding multiplication problem. This gives us 5 times 0 equals 0, which we know checks out. Things are a little bit more complicated, though, when we look at 5 divided by 0. If we have 5 divided by 0, and we want to figure out what that is, the corresponding multiplication problem is going to be 0 times what number equals 5. And unfortunately, there's not anything we can multiply 0 by to get 5. So what that means is that there's not any sort of an answer that makes sense. So in this situation, we say it's undefined. We are not allowed to divide by 0. We may not divide by 0. It's just not allowed, and we say that that operation is undefined. The same is true if we try to take 0 divided by 0. This is also undefined. Take a look at some of the example videos to get some practice to make sure that you're comfortable with multiplication and division problems with positives and negatives. And next class, we will move on to decimals.